Hello and welcome to The Toughest Choice. I'm Stephanie Reynolds. I am delighted to have Brent Mullins as my guest today. And let me tell you a little bit about Brent. Brent's an executive coach who helps VPs and aspiring executives close the gap between potential and achievement so they can execute at the highest level, command influence, and make an impact that lasts. He's got decades of experience as global head of HR and other senior roles in Fortune 200 companies like Philips Healthcare, Aramark Healthcare, and Morgan Stanley. So he's really sat at that executive table, navigated high-stakes leadership challenges, and understands firsthand, and this is important, what separates leaders who thrive from those who stall. And he helps leaders sharpen their edge, expand their influences, and sustain peak performance without burnout or wasted effort. And his approach is built for driven executives who refuse to plateau and who want to lead with clarity, confidence, and lasting impact. Welcome, Brent.
Brent. Thank you so much, Stephanie. It's beyond a pleasure to be here.
Knowing you as long as I have and knowing those you've worked with, I'm delighted to be able to have you on this show, but also to have this kind of conversation with you because you've seen so much, had so much experience, and understand the challenges that leadership and leaders face. And so let's just start off. What about this podcast drew you to this conversation besides our relationship, which I appreciate a lot?
Well, we are of like minds in so many ways, and especially when it comes to leadership.
Yeah.
And the idea, so the things that draw me to leadership, the idea that a person can be in a position of authority or power and not be a leader and see the really not so good effects of that.
Yes.
And then to see people in all of our imperfections be in a position of leadership and embrace the idea that the greater good is inseparable from the act of being a leader.
Yeah.
And the wonderful things that come with that for organizations, for individuals, when they have the benefit of following or being a part of an organization that has genuine leaders at the helm.
Thank you. I couldn't have said it better. I've said recently, that it's pretty crazy out there right now.
It is.
And people, there's a lot of fear. A lot of fear I'm noticing in my clients, noticing in their organizations across the board. And the fear I would categorize, and I'd love to get your thought about this, the fear I'd categorize is people are afraid that the status quo is slipping away.
Mm-hmm.
And business as usual is slipping away in terms of balancing doing what's right for the organization with what's right for the people and even themselves as leaders. I'm really noticing that. Are you as well?
Absolutely. And fear seems to be the operative word because it has so many presentations. From the idea of people have become more controlling, people have become more perfectionistic, people have become so many different things as the fear meter gets cranked up. And no one likes to say, I feel afraid, right? But it's presenting and coming up in conversation so much.
Yes.
I love the fact that you're starting this podcast because it gets to the heart of that in so many ways.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Well, ultimately, leaders need to find, in my opinion, they need to find their value system that makes them tick as individuals and also as leaders. And one of my strongest values is courage. And that doesn't mean you're not afraid.
Right.
It means you go on in spite of it. And so I'm so curious, in your experience, think about it for me. Either I'd love to know a little bit about the leaders that you've seen succeed and the ones that you've seen not succeed, even though, they may have hit certain numbers in their organization that the organizations were looking for. Do you have some thoughts about those? Do you have any
I
leaders that
do,
come?
and after I share mine, I'd love to hear yours too, because I know your track record. The maybe starting with, kind of what we don't aspire to, and the story that comes to mind is the idea, leaders, some people in positions of authority who I wouldn't say necessarily are leaders, evoke kind of inherent or instinctual distrust because you can tell they're optimizing for themselves.
Yeah.
And sadly, in some of my prior roles and seeing leaders have an opportunity to make an investment in their people and see those people, contribute more, feel like they're learning and like have that aliveness that comes with making a difference in their roles as leaders. Having an opportunity to invest and yet blocking the investments in those people. And metaphorically, it's like a grape withering to a raisin on the vine, right? Those leaders who work for the executive who's blocking that development, they atrophy.
Yeah.
And at some point, the story repeats itself. And what I've seen time and again is that senior leader who blocks eventually leaves by choice or by not.
Yeah.
We've seen a million reductions in force and layoffs, and those leaders who were quote unquote protected from from growing or being invested in,
Yeah.
find themselves on the street, atrophied, not as sharp as their peers, having a very hard time being employable.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the greatest sins of quote unquote leadership, of people in leadership roles who are not sharpening the saw for their people as they go forward.
I love that analogy, sharpening the saw. I had the good fortune of interviewing a leader yesterday who takes her whole pleasure from developing others. And I think you've just hit on a point. There is leaders ultimately that don't invest in others end up over time, they themselves end up without work, without many times meaningful lives. I've seen it happen. And I had one leader tell me years ago, and this was at the moment when I decided I couldn't work with him anymore. He said, well, I don't really care how hard my folks work. I just want to get paid. I just care that they pay me. And obviously he trusted me enough to say something that revealing.
Right.
But what he didn't realize in that moment, and maybe I would respond differently today, was in my mind, I thought, oh, I can't work with this guy anymore. Because that responsibility of developing others, supporting others, is endemic to building strong culture, which builds strong business.
Absolutely.
And they go hand in hand. So
value add, right? Creating value for the organization.
Yeah.
So much comes from that idea of sharpening and being in that growth space of wanting to add more to the business. And how do I do that? Because what I did before as a leader is not going to serve me in my next chapter. I've got to change, grow, adapt.
Yes.
If I'm going to keep leading and adding more to the business. And I get it. I know a lot of leaders have said, like, I don't see the ROI, right? I want to make the investment because I don't see that. And I think that's a big part of the, if you will, the cost or the price that the leaders with courage will make. They'll put the money down to figure out if, in fact, they can see the ROI from an investment in their people.
Well, and then there are people who people lose, they're only leaders if they have followers. They may have a role and a position, but if you don't have followers, people will ultimately, when they get the opportunity, vote with their feet. And there are some people in wartime, individuals who would follow a leader off a cliff.
Really?
And others who would run or potentially shoot them in the back. And so what kind of leader are you, for those of you out there that are listening to this? And what kind of courage does it take to push against the status quo and pull away from that force that holds on to you around? Because we've both, Brent, we've seen leadership teams that get caught up in their own storylines.
Yes.
And what do I mean by that? What would you say that means? And I have an idea about what I think it means, but I'd love to hear your take on that.
Well, in many ways, I think it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy of no matter what we believe as a team, as that executive team, seems to bear out, right? It's like they get target fixation on the story they tell themselves about how the challenges are insurmountable or that they are achievable. It may feel impossible.
Yes.
Depending on where they're starting from and what their
Yes.
perspective is, they seem to live into it time and again.
Yeah, I love that. To add on to that, I see this story that they tell themselves in addition to rationalize bad behavior,
Mm,
to rationalize not doing the blocking and tackling of supporting people, developing them, paying them fairly. They tell themselves a story that this is dead wood, we've got to cut it. And sometimes there is, okay, sometimes people are under functioning, but if they've been developed properly or paid attention to properly, that reveals itself sooner rather than later. And that's a responsibility, a discipline that's necessary as a leader to pay attention to that and manage people out that may not have the ability to actually get to the next level that's necessary for the organization and the team.
absolutely.
And yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask you, how do you make sense of that where they are telling themselves those stories?
Well, okay. If I want to make more money and my boss is going to make sure that even if we don't bonus other folks beneath the leadership team as much, we're going to make some cuts, hit our bottom line, do them indiscriminately, but we'll find a way to rationalize who we're cutting and why.
Yes.
We're not going to actually take the time and have the discipline. I'm sorry, we could compare this to some massive cuts that are going on in the government today. No one's taking the time or using the discipline to actually determine if there's and we know there are inefficiencies, where they really lie, who's really capable of functioning in an effective way and who isn't, who's been functioning. And so it's the same problem. There's this, we're going to rationalize making these cuts. And by the way, even though other people may have salary reductions, they might lose their jobs, the executive team's still going to get bonused because the executive team is bonused on the bottom line. And I know I'm like calling it out right now. And this is the holy grail of business, make money and so on. And as an exec, people are very well compensated much of the time. And frankly, though, I've watched those executives rationalize the letting go and the mistreatment of others without the discipline in the name of profitability, which ultimately means I get to keep my job, I get to put more money in my pocket, I get to put my kids through college, whatever the story is. That's the kind of rationalizing that I've seen.
Yeah, and I think to add on to that, in really significant global organizations where there's a footprint on every continent and the complexity is through the roof.
Yeah.
I think many of those leaders are caught in a system where they feel ineffective, if you will. They've received the orders and they're running a big business. It's billions in revenue upon billions. And they have an accountability to a price, right? A stock price.
Yep.
And on the one hand, there's this incredible commitment that seems to be common denominator in the DNA. There's an extraordinary accountability drive, I think, for so many senior executives. It's just part of who they are.
Yes.
Right? There's this "I'm going to deliver, you can count on me" kind of sentiment.
Yes.
And I think that feeds into some of the story you're talking about, which is I don't fail. Like I'm not backing down. I'm going to deliver.
Yes. I love that. I think that's right. I think that drive. I love leaders and I love leadership.
I know you do.
it's I think it's the most important job, period, other than parenting. And that's a leadership role in itself. But I I I think that's right. And then there's the fear factor. So there's the drive factor, and
Hmm.
then there's the fear factor. And the fear factor is if I buck what the CEO is saying, or I buck what the VP or my exec VP is telling me we need to be doing, even though in my gut I know it's wrong. I have watched in a heartbreaking way over and over again
Mm.
people at those with that very beautiful drive that you were describing go against their better judgment
Yeah.
in the name of staying, I'm going to call it safe. And nobody, like you said, wants to talk about fear, especially men. But I think, look, we all have it. It's part of life. Some people go on in spite of it. Some people capitulate, and some people do both and rationalize. So what separates the wheat from the chaff? Okay, because we look, execs are like powerhouses, really,
Yeah.
especially at the scale that you just were describing, right? They're powerhouses. And they have to have a myriad of skill sets that we're not even talking about here to be able to have gotten there, to be able to have succeeded enough in order
Mhm.
to make their way up the ladder. Some get promoted prematurely for sure, but for the most part, in these huge organizations, they've had to do a lot of work to get to where they are and prove themselves. And there's a lot of redeeming qualities. When push comes to shove, though, have you, what do you think separates people when you
Well,
see that? Yeah, go for it.
no, I love that question because I feel like it gets to the heart of maybe why you started this podcast and are calling it talking about the hard decisions.
Yes,
It's that's it. I think going back to that drive, the fear and the drive are two sides of the same coin. There is the drive that pulls us forward. There's also that drive, the fear of failing,
yes,
right? And I think that they're always at play together in the context that you and I are talking about. And
fair.
then there's something special in there too. And I think you have examples of this for given some of our prior conversations where someone's willing to make that hard decision for the better of the organization, for the better of the community, whatever the better of is, right? There's something in there that drives them forward that says, I know there's a cost to me in this. I'm still going to do it. I'm
Yeah,
going to do the right thing.
that's right. And I love that. There's something about being clear and grounded in your center. There's something about knowing that you can thrive beyond the certain circumstances you're facing today. I
Mhm.
think people get amnesia. I know I did. I know I did. In the short time that I was away from my consulting practice and in an organization making a regular salary, when you're on your own, you don't make regular salary, you work for yourself. So, it's you have to pay attention all the time to where the money's coming from. When you're internal and you get that salary and the bonuses are lined up, it's really easy to get used to that. I had an executive at a very large organization that shall remain nameless say to me, it's you entrepreneurs that are really the courageous people. Us internally, it scares us to think about what you guys have to do. You have to go out there and find your lunch every day.
Yeah.
But I myself, even after 27 years or whatever it was of being on my own, just a few years of getting that paycheck and getting those bonuses, I developed a little bit of amnesia about my own capabilities. And when it was time for me, for my life choices to go into the next phase for my own reasons, I felt a little scared. Like, can I do it again? And so if you take that and multiply it by entire careers,
Yeah.
and not suggesting that people who walk away from lucrative situations are necessarily going to go out on their own. I don't mean to say that, but just leaving. And they're in that milieu, they're in that environment, and it's got its pull and it's got its teeth into you. And so, why I'm saying all of this is not because it's just doing the right thing, which is ultimately what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
It's also having the wherewithal to remember to believe in yourself.
Mm.
And that if you could make it there, chances are you can make it a ton of other places much more easily, even than the environment you're in right now. But people don't think that way. They forget.
That's so true.
Yeah. And so, how do you remind yourself? And when you're making these decisions, if things don't sit well with us, and they don't sit well with our conscience, there's a reason for it. And if we ignore it, I think we ignore it at our peril, much greater peril than getting your CEO mad at you.
Truly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it feels like a black box question about what is it that we see in leaders that enables them to make those really hard decisions, like regardless of the personal cost and reputation or whatever the cost for them might be. In extraordinary circumstances, it's their safety, and yet they still make the right decision despite that.
Yes.
You told me a story about someone you're working with who really exemplified that. And
Yes.
I won't say a name or anything. And I wonder if it comes to mind for you about some of the people you've worked with who are the ones who are making those good for everybody type of decisions that many people would say that is a back-breaking type of decision.
Thank you for asking that. A few examples do come to mind. One, without again naming names, startup environment, board filled with investors, and a lot of pressure about cutting compensation and future compensation for the employees who are actually bringing the product to market through clinical trials. And I watched how this individual fought against the board, a board that threatened the heck out of him, and fought for his employees because it was a fundamental value that he refused to let go of.
Mm-hmm.
And he ran the risk, after a lot of blocking and tackling and years, of losing his situation. And for him, it just wasn't even, he knew it was a risk, but for him, he was not willing to let it go because he couldn't live with himself otherwise. And we had many conversations about the what ifs.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a key here for people. And that is to actually go down the road of loss, not to assume it, but be prepared for it, so that you're not in the, oh my gosh, what would I do if? It's like, take the fear, instead of having it be in the background, bring it into the conversation with you.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody who you trust, and not just a coach. Brent and I, of course, that's what we do. So we get we have that experience and are privy to these conversations. It's just, make sure you're talking with somebody who has perspective, who has experience, who has context, who may have contacts.
Yeah.
And so that you're not alone in that space of trying to make the right decision, because we need to be reflected back to about what our capabilities are. I think.
By the way, I think that is such a hugely important point.
You do.
Oh, so much of the U.S. culture is the old stereotype of John Wayne going it alone, right? Defeating thousands by himself.
Yes.
And it conveys this message that's so in error, that leadership is going it alone, And that's not it. It's a team sport. You have to have community. You have to have people as advisors and close friends and confidants you can talk to. And I think you said it so very well there. I just want to double down on it and let people know that you don't have to go alone. You shouldn't be going alone, right? You're
Shouldn't
way
be.
better off in community.
Much better off. You'll get a lot of great ideas. The organizations that are out there that support leaders developing, the ones that leaders report, like a Vistage type organization where
Mhm.
leaders get together who are non-competitive in terms of industry, get together to throw ideas around, bring their problems into the forum.
Right.
I don't know any successful leaders that I can think of that don't have advisors in the form of colleagues, friends, and even professionals. They're attorneys, they're coaches, but also their colleagues. They're colleagues who are facing that unusual set of tough choices that they have all the time.
Yeah.
And so getting help is smart because two heads are better than one.
Truly, truly. You can go a long way with somebody in your corner. With the story you were telling about that CEO facing down with the board,
Yeah.
so clearly there was the potential cost for him was monetary, right? For himself and for others.
Oh, yeah. And reputation.
And reputation, right?
Big
And
time.
I'm really curious though, like what else you perceived that he perceived was potential loss for them or cost of going forward.
Well, he knew, I think, that he had a unique relationship. I had the good fortune of being able to interview a lot of people who worked for him doing a 360
Mhm.
and multiple times. And this was a guy everybody would follow into battle. And and it was a one out of, I don't know what the numbers are in the biotech startup space that make it, like 1 out of 50, something like that.
Uh-huh.
And so don't quote me exactly, but it's
Yeah.
something in that ratio. And so they were succeeding tremendously in terms of clinical trials and being approved in other countries. And they were on a very end being recognized as like the startup wonderkins of the industry. And so there's a level where I think he knew that the risk wasn't just that he'd lose his job and all the options. The bigger risk was that the asset wouldn't make it to market.
Mhm.
And it was going to save a lot of people a lot of health concerns. I won't say specifically what it was for because that
Yeah.
would go too revealing. And but that it was going to make a huge difference and will, if it continues, make a huge difference in the quality of life of millions of people at a very significant level. And I think for him, that was what drove him to want to do the whole thing in the first place,
Yeah.
to make a difference. And I don't know about you, but I find that everybody wants to work for a good cause.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Purpose is powerful.
It's so powerful, and believing that what you're doing will result in something that really improves lives or alleviates suffering. That seems to be consistent across the board. It gets
Mhm.
lost in the fear and gets lost in the shuffle. So I think he knew that the risk there was even greater, that the company wouldn't succeed because he was holding things together.
Yeah. So when I hear a story like that, I reflect on what could be the intensity of the fear that goes with that. Like, so on a personal level, yeah, I don't want to compromise a value because that feels really terrible to compromise your core values.
Yes,
And I could be out of a whole lot of money that could create me a lot of freedom, like a lot of opportunity, all those kinds of things.
that's
And
right.
altruistically, what I'm bringing to market is going to really make a big difference for a lot of people's lives.
That's right.
And failing to do that could be even worse. So I hear that, and the word courage, as you said before, is just screaming and that story about what it took to actually go through that and stand by that, his decision to commit to not seeing those changes take effect.
I think that's right, Brent. And I think, how do we summon that courage? Because everybody has the capacity for it. And how do we stand on our principles in a way that doesn't sell out our folks or sell ourselves out? Because when we allow our principles to be compromised from doing the right thing, then we're also selling ourselves out, because then we're living a more hollow existence and we're rationalizing. And a lot of people, they don't think about it. They put it in a closet and they close the door, but it's always there.
It's always there.
It's always there. And the examples, though, that I'd love to ask you about are those where you've seen leaders make that tough choice, take the risk, and succeed. Because I think we need to remember, as individuals and leaders societally and inside of our organizations, that not saying anything, not trying, not truly standing on our principles doesn't give the opportunity for the right thing to be done. We're skipping. It's like either I stay or I go. Well, there might be a middle ground here.
Yeah.
So I'd love to ask you about what you've seen when leaders have stood up and have persevered.
Yeah, well, the first story that comes to mind, of course, keeping the leader anonymous, is almost what you're asking about. It's more that he was a senior leader who was asked to make some pretty drastic decisions about their operational footprint, which was very large.
Yeah.
And strategically, he knew the right thing to do, but was being pushed into making a decision that was not the right thing to do for the strategy for the organization, but it served a bigger political agenda from the global, if you will, the global executive that this executive was reporting to.
Yep.
And the person I'm talking about stood by their decision because it was the right thing for the organization. It was the right thing for the business that they were leading. And it cost them. There was a big move up that he was docketed for. And the consequence was a big move up didn't happen.
Yeah.
But for so many reasons, it was the right stand to take. In the end, it was so much better for the business and for the people in the business. As I talked to him about it, I was like, how do you feel now after the fact? It's good. I feel good. And he used a great story with me about there's a very popular former naval officer, now author, this guy, Jocko Willink. And Jocko has this approach where he says, no matter what news comes forward, my answer is going to be good. Didn't get the promotion? Good. You can sharpen your saw, right? Get better at what are the things you need to get better at to get the promotion. Lost a big client? Good. This will get you better at your client acquisition process, right?
Yes.
So the answer was always good. And this leader's response was, I didn't get what I wanted. Good.
Yeah.
I'm going to, for the language I might use here might not be totally appropriate, but he was saying, I need to be better, positive, political in the organization.
Yes.
Right? Because he could make a stand, but it cost him greatly.
Yes.
When he realized he didn't have advocates and allies on his side to make the right decision.
See, you know that's a passion of mine.
I do.
So thank you for that lead in. And I love the example because he was using it to improve and took it. And I love the mindset of good. Now, what can I learn from this? How can I take it forward? And that capability of just because somebody's great at their job doesn't mean everybody sees it. And there are so many competing agendas going on in these organizations that are not competing just because there's only so many days in the year and there's only so many numbers of resources that we have.
Right.
And so people are often battling over resources in order to be able to further their area and their folks. And that capability of recognizing and acting to bring people along, to align with others, to work the back channels, to do meetings before meetings, to make sure you understand what's in it for what your potential peer or other may lose if you go forward with something, and have conversations so that you prepare people for the direction that you need to go. You've got to work the system, because not just because and so many people think, oh, politics in organizations, but the reality is, where two or more are gathered, I always say, you're going to have some challenge around, do I want to have fish for dinner, or are we going to have tacos? And so that takes a skill set and a commitment to, and this is what I'm going to bring it back to something you said earlier about community. Creating community. A lot of organizations divide and conquer in their mentality. Leaders, senior leaders, they want people fighting with each other in the name of maybe a better outcome, or just that's survival kind of. But organizations that create the highest levels of collaboration and community are tracked at having the greatest consistent success. And so this isn't just about doing the right thing. This is about succeeding both in the org and for the org.
Yes, I so subscribe to that.
Yeah.
I've seen the dichotomy of executive team who love the palace intrigue, right? And backstabby competitive kind of behavior.
Yeah.
And how that completely flowed down through the organization, where the leaders in one function could not have a conversation with the leaders in another function without it turning into an argument.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then I've also seen an executive team who shows up and does the hard thing, where they're making investments in relationship and they're horse trading, right? To be able to put the head count where it needs to go for the organization to be successful, not for their fiefdom to grow.
Yes.
Right. And it's the collaborative nature of that and how important that is for the organization. That effect is you have those leaders in those functions working together, having a beer, going out, getting a coffee, right? It just permeates the whole organization when that culture is the one of collaboration in the name of the good for all.
I love it. And those leaders are the ones who are most respected by their colleagues and peers, and who they would follow. Oftentimes I coach leaders who are struggling with peers. I'm like, don't you want them to potentially work for you one day? Well, yeah, because the individual I'm working with wants to go up in the org, and they actually aspire to the top jobs. And I'm like, well, then why aren't you treating them that way? Not like they report to you, but like they're somebody you need to invest in, as opposed to somebody who you need to compete with.
I hope people heard that and so locked onto that message, Stephanie, because that is so powerful and so very rarely considered as people have their aspirations for their career.
Yeah, it's kind of like, well, it's one of the reasons that leaders get chosen by boards isn't just based on their vision of the future. They're also chosen for, will people follow them?
Yes.
Who's the most likely to be followed? And so there are like, and if you invest in people, no matter what level they are, lower, middle, upper, wherever they are, the more you invest, the more you get back. And it has to come from a certain place of veracity. It has to feel true. You can't just fake it. But once you get started, and act as if a little bit in the beginning, you'd be surprised how gratifying it is, because people will be like, oh boy, Brent is coming to talk to me. This can only be good for, or if it's bad, at least we'll figure it out together, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's what you want as a leader. You need it as a leader. You need to have your peers by your side. And we have, to your point about palace intrigue, who's in favor, who's not in favor. That gets so old. It's so boring after a while. It's so distracting also from the work itself. It's very
so true. The scenario where it looks competitive, you have people internally vying for a top job, and somebody gets it, and you're like, well, of course she got it, right? Because she's such an obvious one. And yeah, I already go to her for advice already, right? So her being my boss, not a big deal.
right.
Compared to the one where it's competitive and cutthroat and somebody gets the top job, and the next day it's like, well, who am I getting rid of because we cannot work together?
Right. Or being scared to death that you're going to get cut because
Yes,
you've been fighting.
right.
So yeah, it's common sense. But again, I'll quote William Ury, who wrote Getting to Yes, Getting Past No, several other books, Harvard, MIT, Stanford, Tufts. The guy's amazing. He said it's common sense. And I said, yeah, it sure is, but it's not common practice.
Right.
We've lost our common sense. So this is really great, Brent. I'd like to pull through the three areas that I picked up that we've been touching on and see if I'm missing anything. One is that leaders have to stand in themselves in order to make these really tough choices when they feel at risk. That being afraid is normal. That's all part of the same, right? It's all part of the same number one, which is if you go against your own values, go against what's best for the business, ultimately it will bite you. It may not bite you in the moment, but it'll bite you in the long run. And if you don't have your principles, you may have your bank account for a while, but ultimately people will vote with their feet too. And you may not be able to get hired elsewhere if you don't stand for what you really believe in. But in order to do that, it takes courage. And so the second point we've been talking about is making sure you have colleagues and advisors around you, other leaders who you can bounce ideas off of to actually think through scenarios, what if scenarios of staying, of going, the worst case, the best case, ideas you might not have even considered, which include the third area that you mentioned, which has to do with how are you working your peers and others internally to bring them along with you in order to support the right thing. Because we know, and research shows, that doing the right thing for the business and the wrong thing for the people does not bear out in profitability in the long run.
Absolutely not.
It is in the short run, maybe, but not in the long run. But that doing the right thing for the people and for the business builds strong, repeatable, successful business and organizational cultures.
And a whole lot of people who want what you want, right? Achieving that strategic aim, whatever that may be.
That's right. That's right. Well, I so appreciate this conversation and having this time with you. In terms of breakthroughs, I just love to hear one breakthrough about you that you've had with those that you've worked with in terms of your own way of measuring success as a coach. I'd love to hear about a success story from you, how you would characterize that, because you have so much background, you have so much leadership background, and you have a ton of advising and coaching background. And so I'd love to hear one to seal our podcast today, one success story that you could share with us.
Well, thank you for all that. And when people ask me why I coach, my answer is silly. It's I love helping people get what they want.
Mm.
And it's a wonderful thing to be a conspiracy of good, right? Or with somebody else to help them achieve what they're after. And people will come in, the coaching is a little fuzzy about what they want, but they know what they don't want.
Yeah.
And finding that clarity, one of my favorites, one that shows up time and time again, it seems like, is people get this message around, you could use more executive presence,
Yeah.
right? And whatever that might look like. It's almost like a death sentence in so many ways for people to hear that, because they're like, what do I do with that? It's so fuzzy and so ambiguous. And I've heard it from people who want to be executives. I hear it from CEOs telling me about multiple executives on their team. And it translates almost every time this new fantastic level of confidence and ease and flow by which these leaders ultimately move through the organization.
Mm.
And
Good.
that is, I don't know how many times that's happened now in the time that I've been coaching on my own. But the satisfaction and the comfort and the growth that comes with that for the leader, whoever that might be, to see them on the other side of that, where it's like, I can't believe that even came up. Right now, I'm this new person. It's so satisfying, right? Because the results come with it.
Yes.
The way that they lead their people, right, through their confidence, their restored confidence, and their efficacy on how they are finding the best of their people, and the collaboration that comes with that, and the results they're getting for their business or their nonprofit or their aid organization, it's night and day, right? It's like, I need to pay bills, but I think I would do this even if I didn't get paid for it.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, seeing the breakthrough. And I love what you said, Brent, about flowing effortlessly in the organization and being able to move in the organization in a way that is enjoyable for them and successful for them. That's wonderful. That's just great. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the question. Thank you for the time.
My pleasure. And we'll put information on your, how to connect to you if anybody feels drawn out there to connect and learn more about Brent, into the information that we share. And I can't recommend you more highly, of course. And there are very few coaches I would have this conversation with, because of what you've seen, what you've done, and what you know. And I don't say that lightly. I really mean it. And I just appreciate you, and I appreciate your time today. And thanks so much for joining me on The Toughest Choice.
My pleasure.
Thank you for listening. To hear more conversations with leaders, please subscribe to The Toughest Choice wherever you listen to podcasts. For updates, please connect with me on LinkedIn. This is Stephanie Reynolds. Thanks for listening.